When it comes to studying the brain, specifically in the field of neuroscience, cognitive psychology, once you start looking at all these studies, existing studies, you'll shortly notice that most of the current body of knowledge focus on the physical aspect of the brain. For example, oxygen level, blood level, spike in the neurons, etc. Very few of them, or very small portion of the body of knowledge, focuses on the non-physical aspect. Neuro-oscillation, for example, is one of them, aka brain waves, aka EEG. And most of those EEG-related studies, if you look closer at them, they are, for example, health-related. For example, in the health industry, we use EEG to detect seizures, for example. There are part of that body of knowledge that looks at EEG data that has to do with, for example, using it into cognitive psychology and cognitive neurosciences, but those studies are very few if you compare them with the grander scheme of things. And then if we break it down even further and look at those now very, very few studies that look into neuro-oscillations at a cognitive load, let's say, level, even them, you can break it down into smaller portion of them being the type of studies that include sentiment analysis within them. Why do we need to care about sentiment and analysis? First and foremost, sentiments are extremely important because they are a huge part of human cognitive psychology and cognitive sciences. But also, not only are they important at a physical level, but also at a non-physical level, because whether we like it or not, human thoughts can never be separated from sentiments. And those sentiments, you can divide them into the 6 basic one, but you could also divide them into the 4,000+ one that some scientists have been counting them. So it's not a small topic, but we tend to neglect it. Now, I don't want to take a stand as to what I think, what I believe, why sentiment analysis has not been incorporated as much within the body of knowledge of neuroscience. But I do want to take a stance as to why it has not been as impactful within the body of knowledge of neuroscience, where it has to do with neuro-oscillation, aka the invisible brain. And one main reason is because scientists have been reluctant to rely on the validity of EEG data to determine the sentiment of a person. Essentially, that is what it boils down to. We don't necessarily talk about it, but that's the underlying issue. We've been able to neglect it because of the reasons I just mentioned, and we've been able to get away with it. However, with the technology advances that we have right now at our disposal, such as neural networks, we can no longer neglect this huge gap in the body of knowledge, in the scientific literature, mainly because we are able now to run data analysis at not only a much larger scale, but also much less dependent on the human error, the human workload, and all the other issues that we've been trying to use as our excuses so far. In my most recent book, Neuro-Oscillations in Neural Networks, I covered the overarching type of neuro-oscillation data as data input, within 3 top neural networks architecture that I already covered. I am now just started working on my 3rd book, where I'm taking one of these architectures that works best to use when you want to do sentiment analysis of the neural networks, EEG, that has to do with sentiment analysis. And while this is still at a very high level exploration phase, there is a huge opportunity there for us to start exploring, because in my opinion, there's a huge gap exists for whatever reason that we don't need to go into, but also because we haven't had the technology where we could have actually used it, but now we do. So we don't have much more excuses. And if you say that, well, okay, I know neural networks, but I don't have EEG data, that excuse no longer exists either, because there are a lot of institutions, research labs that are making their EEG data available, some of which I've already talked about in past videos, but also I've mentioned them in my book. And so the excuses are sort of no longer relevant as we move forward within the technology. As I mentioned in my previous video, there are, for example, neural networks or a combination of several of them, for example, deepfakes that I mentioned in my last video, that can successfully take information from images of human faces and determine their sentiment. So that is already possible, and the technology there also is improving as we move forward. However, the same technology is also somewhat possible to use on brainwaves. And so you can use the images that you can extract from brainwaves, you can turn them into images, and then use neural networks to extract sentiment. So this is the gap that really needs our attention, especially those of us who are interested in combining several different sciences and disciplines, and also for those of us who are future-looking thinking. And whether you are a computer scientist or a neuroscientist or none of the above, essentially the technology is already here, and it's just for us to keep exploring. And the reason I use the word exploration a lot, because in my opinion, science in any form or shape, it's just about exploration. And so even if you don't have any knowledge about what I just talked about, but you're interested, you can very easily find people online and just teach yourself these and start exploring yourself. And so in my upcoming book that I just talked about, that is what the main topic of it will be. Exploration phase of looking at one specific neural network architecture that can be used with EEG brain waves turned into images, the same way that we now have neural networks that analyze the sentiment of a human facial human face. More or less, kind of, some architectures neural networks architecture could also be used to do sentiment analysis on brain waves instead. So that is a huge topic that it's extremely interesting, and again, there's a huge gap there, and very all right, guys, let me know what you think. If you like my videos, smash that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.